The unexpected assignment. Adrian Ace Carter was used to orders. He followed them, questioned them when necessary, and completed them with precision. That was the job. That was what it meant to serve in the United Earth Defense Corps. But this order, this one made no sense. He read the official dispatch on his terminal for the 5th time, his mind struggling to process the words. Mandatory interspecies pairing enigmatic tarticin. Lieutenant Adrian Carter. Assignment: diplomatic union with a Federation partner. Duration: indefinite. Indefinite. What the hell did that mean? He was a pilot, not a politician, and now they were telling him he had been selected to participate in what was essentially an arranged interspecies partnership. Adrian leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. First contact with the Senderan Federation had happened barely 5 years ago. It had been a tense situation. Humans were newcomers to galactic politics, and the Federation, a vast and ancient coalition of advanced alien species, had initially viewed Earth as an outlier, unpredictable and reckless. Yet, for reasons beyond Adrian's pay grade, the Federation had eventually extended an invitation to humanity. But that invitation had come with conditions. And now, apparently, those conditions included pairing human representatives with alien diplomats in what they were calling a cooperative genetic and cultural integration program. Adrian scoffed. They were dressing it up in fancy words, but the reality was crystal clear. This wasn't just about politics. The Federation wanted human DNA. He was still processing this absurdity when a voice chimed in over his room's intercom. Lieutenant Carter, report to conference room A7 immediately. He exhaled sharply. No choice then. With a resigned sigh, he stood, adjusted his uniform, and marched toward his fate. The conference room was sterile, sleek, and unmistakably alien. Federation design leaned toward smooth organic structures, almost like their buildings and ships had grown into shape rather than being built. The room's walls pulsed faintly with an indigo light, shifting in rhythm with the station's artificial gravity fluctuations. Adrian forced himself to stand tall, arms crossed, exuding defiance, not outright hostility, but just enough attitude to make it clear he wasn't thrilled about this. Across the table sat his supposed match. Adrian had expected something grotesque, or at least entirely unrelatable, a creature with multiple limbs, insectoid features, or perhaps something that communicated via pheromones and clicks instead of words. But instead, she looked almost human. Velis. That was the name on the diplomatic briefing. Her skin had a faint iridescent shimmer, shifting subtly in the artificial light. Emerald green, but warm rather than reptilian. High cheekbones framed a delicate but unreadable face, and her amber gold eyes locked onto his with a sharp intensity. No doubt about it, she was studying him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Velis tilted her head, the movement too precise to be human. "Lieutenant Carter," she said finally, her voice smooth but carrying an edge of authority. "You do not appear willing." Adrian narrowed his eyes. "Should I be?" Her lips twitched, not quite a smirk, but close. "You humans have a reputation for resisting structure," she noted, defying expectations. Some in the Federation find this frustrating. I, however, find it intriguing. There it was, the real reason for all of this. Adrian wasn't stupid. He had read between the lines of the Federation's agreements. They feared humanity's unpredictability. Most Federation species operated on centuries of careful, methodical decision-making, their societies built on stable, rigid hierarchies. Humanity, on the other hand, broke rules. They adapted in ways no species should have been able to. And now, instead of trying to fight against that nature, the Federation was trying to harness it. This wasn't just some diplomatic pairing program. It was an experiment. Adrian exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "Let me guess. I wasn't randomly selected. Velis's eyes flickered with something, a brief moment of hesitation. Then she smiled, small but knowing. Correct. Damn it. She leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the table between them. The way she moved was calculated, deliberate, like a hunter sizing up prey. The Federation values order, Velis continued. But we also understand that evolution requires instability, controlled chaos, and your species is the embodiment of that paradox. Adrian arched a brow. So what? You're studying me. Studying humans. Perhaps. She didn't even try to deny it. Or perhaps we are simply allowing the inevitable to unfold. Adrian laughed dryly. The inevitable. Velis didn't blink. Your species and mine are compatible. That word sent a shiver down his spine. Compatible. He ran a hand down his face. You know, I signed up to fight wars in space. Not to. He gestured vaguely. Whatever this is. Velis observed him, eyes sharp as blades. And yet, you are here. Adrian exhaled slowly. She wasn't wrong. One way or another, this was happening. The only question was whether he would fight it every step of the way, or whether he would try to understand what they really wanted. Velis stood suddenly, moving with an effortless grace. There will be a formal introduction ceremony, she said. You are expected to attend. Resistance would be unwise. Adrian didn't move. And if I refuse? Velis considered him for a long moment before stepping closer. Too close. Her golden eyes searched his face, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something else. Something vulnerable. Then I will have failed. Adrian frowned. Failed. Velis hesitated. Then, as if regretting saying too much, she took a step back. Prepare yourself, Lieutenant Carter. This is only the beginning. Then she turned and left, her silhouette vanishing beyond the pulsing indigo walls. Adrian remained still, his mind racing. What the hell had he just gotten himself into? Sparks in the void. The first thing Adrian noticed about Xenderan's ceremonial dress was that it felt like wearing a second skin. The material was unlike anything he had encountered before. Smooth, flexible, yet somehow reinforcing. It adjusted perfectly to his form, shifting in temperature with every movement. The color shimmered between deep navy and silver, almost as if it were responding to his heartbeat. He hated it. As he stood before the massive observation window of the Federation flagship, watching the blue swirl of a distant nebula, he reminded himself that this was temporary. A mission, nothing more. Right, a mission where I'm expected to bond with an alien woman. The doors behind him slid open with a soft hiss. He didn't turn around. I assume this is where you pretend to admire the view while contemplating escape options. Velis's voice was calm, almost teasing. Adrian smirked but didn't turn. Something like that. Velis moved beside him, gazing out at the stars. The glow of the nebula reflected in her golden eyes, giving them an almost otherworldly depth. There is no escape, you realize, she said, tilting her head. Adrian scoffed. That's so. Do you know why the Federation chose this location for our ceremony? Velis continued, ignoring his sarcasm. Adrian exhaled through his nose. Let me guess, something poetic about unity and vastness. She nodded slightly. That, and because this nebula is a graveyard. Adrian's expression hardened. Velis gestured at the distant, swirling lights. Hundreds of years ago, two of the Federation's founding species fought a war here. Their hatred burned so bright that neither side survived. She glanced at him. And now, the Federation stands in their place. Adrian turned toward her, studying her face. There was something deeper beneath her words. A warning, maybe. Is that what this is, then? He asked. A way to avoid war. Velis's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected the question. Perhaps. Adrian folded his arms. What do you really think of this whole pairing program? You've barely spoken about it. Velis's gaze didn't waver. You assume I have the luxury of choice. Adrian frowned. You mean they forced you into this? For the first time, Velis looked away. I mean that duty is not always aligned with desire. Adrian studied her closely, reading between the lines. She didn't choose this either. Not entirely. That revelation made something twist in his chest. So that's it then? He asked. We just pretend this is normal. Play along like good little ambassadors. Velis turned back to him, stepping closer than before, close enough that he could see the faint shimmer of her skin, like waves of energy moving beneath the surface. We could, she said softly. Or, Adrian raised a brow. Or, Velis's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, something flickered in her golden eyes. Something human. Or we could prove them wrong. Adrian felt his pulse quicken. How? Velis smiled then, a real smile. That, she said, voice barely above a whisper, depends on you. Before Adrian could respond, a chime echoed through the chamber. The ceremony was about to begin. Velis's expression shifted back to neutral diplomacy, but Adrian could still feel the tension between them. The silent understanding that neither of them wanted to be a pawn in this game. But if they played their cards right, maybe it wouldn't have to be. With one last glance at the nebula's ghostly glow, Adrian turned and followed Velis into the unknown. The hidden agenda. The ceremony had been a spectacle of control. Adrian had seen his fair share of military parades and diplomatic summits, but nothing quite like this. The Federation's elite had gathered in a grand, ethereal hall aboard the flagship, a place of hovering platforms, luminescent banners, and architecture that seemed to bend light itself. 1,000 pairs of eyes had been locked onto him and Velis as they stood before a Federation elder, reciting binding vows in a language Adrian barely understood. When it was over, there had been no applause, no celebration, just silent approval, like the conclusion of a business deal. And now, hours later, Adrian sat alone in his assigned quarters, staring at the swirling projection of the Federation star maps on the ceiling. This wasn't just some cultural exchange. Something else was going on. His mind kept replaying Velis's words from earlier. We could prove them wrong. There was more to this. There had to be. A soft chime signaled someone at his door. Velis. She stepped inside, her usual composed demeanor slightly shaken. We need to talk, she said quietly. Adrian sat up. I'm listening. Velis glanced at the walls, a paranoid habit he had noticed before. She wasn't just being cautious. She knew something. Finally, she exhaled and sat across from him. This program, it's not what they claim it to be. Adrian narrowed his eyes. Yeah, no kidding. Velis hesitated before continuing. They're not just studying human foreign relations. They're studying something specific about you. Adrian frowned. Me? Velis nodded. Humans, in general, but you in particular. Do you know why you were chosen? Adrian scoffed. I assumed because I look good in a uniform. Velis didn't laugh. No, it's because of your mind. Adrian blinked. My mind. Velis leaned forward, her golden eyes scanning his face as if searching for something. Your species, your emotions, they function differently from most Federation species. Your thought patterns are unpredictable. You break rules. You act on instinct rather than order. Adrian raised a brow. And that's bad. Velis shook her head. No, that's dangerous. Adrian's stomach twisted. You're saying they think humans are a threat. Not just a threat, Velis said, voice low. A mutation. The word hung in the air. Mutation. A chill ran down Adrian's spine. That doesn't make sense. What the hell do they want from me? Velis hesitated again before saying, they want to control it. Adrian's blood ran cold. I found classified reports, she admitted. The Federation isn't just studying human behavior. They're mapping it. They want to isolate the part of your species that makes you different. Adrian swallowed hard. And then what? Velis finally met his gaze. They want to see if it can be removed. Silence. For a moment, all Adrian could hear was the hum of the ship's artificial atmosphere. Then, slowly, he stood. His pulse was pounding in his ears. "They're trying to alter human DNA," he said, the realization crashing down on him. Velis nodded grimly. Adrian clenched his fists. So this whole pairing program isn't about diplomacy at all. No, Velis admitted. It's a breeding initiative. Adrian's jaw tightened. For what? To fix us. Velis looked away. That was all the answer he needed. Adrian took a step back, running his hands over his face. His entire body felt hot with anger. "We need to stop this," he said finally. Velis stood too, something fierce in her expression. "I thought you might say that." Adrian exhaled, forcing himself to stay focused. "So what's the plan?" Velis straightened. "First, we get proof. Then, we find a way to expose the Federation's real motives." Adrian nodded, already shifting into combat mode. He had followed orders all his life. But this wasn't a mission anymore. This was war. The breaking point. The Federation ship was a marvel of technological perfection, designed to be impenetrable, flawless, and above all orderly. But Adrian Carter had spent his entire life finding flaws in perfect systems. That was what humans did. They broke things and rebuilt them better. Velis led him down a corridor that pulsed with the faint glow of embedded bioluminescent pathways. She moved quietly, cautiously, but Adrian had long since abandoned subtlety. His mind was racing. If what Velis had told him was true, then the entire foundation of the Federation's partnership with humanity was a lie. They weren't allies. They were subjects in an experiment. Velis stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. "The security checkpoint is just ahead," she whispered. "We have to time this exactly. The scans only reset every 42 seconds. Adrian gave her a sideways glance. 42 seconds. Convenient. Velis smirked. "You humans are not the only ones who study patterns." Adrian exhaled, steadying himself. They had one shot at getting into the Federation's classified data vaults. If they failed, they wouldn't just be caught. They would be erased. Velis turned to him, something flickering in her golden eyes. "Are you ready?" Adrian smirked. "You're asking that now." Velis exhaled, shaking her head. "Your confidence is either inspiring or foolish." Adrian took a step closer. "Guess we'll find out." For a split second, she hesitated. Her gaze dropped to his lips, to his hands clenching into fists. Then she nodded. The moment passed, but Adrian filed it away. Then they moved. Velis slid into the checkpoint's control alcove, her fingers dancing over the console with fluid precision. The doors hummed softly before releasing a near-silent hiss. Adrian slipped through, following the pulse of energy toward the Federation's central archive chamber. The room beyond was cold, sterile, lined with floating holographic data stacks. Velis tapped at a terminal, whispering something in Senderin under her breath. Then the files appeared. Human Genetic Manipulation Program. Phase II. Psychological Conditioning Trials. Phase IV. Genetic Compliance Protocols. Adrian's stomach turned. They really were planning it, he muttered. Velis nodded, her face grim. They've already started. Adrian clenched his fists. Of course they had. Of course the Federation wasn't just going to study humanity. They were going to fix it. And he wasn't about to let that happen. He reached for his wrist console and activated his covered data scrambler, a small piece of stolen tech he had quietly modified over the past few weeks. It would upload every file in this room to an encrypted Earth relay. "Are you sure about this?" Velis asked softly. Adrian glanced at her. She was standing too close, her face too open, her expression caught somewhere between determination and fear. Adrian inhaled sharply. "No," he admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Velis's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but before she could, alarms blared. They had been detected. Time to go. Adrian grabbed her wrist and bolted. Velis didn't hesitate. They sprinted back toward the docking bay, alarms wailing across the ship's corridors. Adrian's heart was pounding, but he barely felt it. Only one thought mattered now. They had the truth. Now they just had to survive long enough to use it. They burst into the shuttle bay, Velis already hacking into the nearest ship's controls. Adrian whirled toward the entrance, raising a stolen plasma weapon just as Federation guards stormed in. "Stand down, human." The voice was cold, clipped, and all too familiar. Adrian turned slowly to face Ambassador Kren. Velis froze. "Father." Adrian's stomach twisted. Of course her father would be the one leading the charge. "You disappoint me, Velis." Kren's voice was eerily calm as he stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. His royal blue robes shimmered, a symbol of his status as one of the Federation's highest-ranking officials. Velis clenched her fists. "I know the truth now." Kren's golden eyes narrowed. "And what do you think will happen if you expose it?" Adrian smirked, shifting his grip on the plasma weapon. "Guess we'll find out." Kren didn't so much as flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Adrian like an insect beneath a magnifying glass. "You're the reason for this," he mused. "I told them you would be a problem." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Yeah. Well, congratulations. You were right." Kren sighed. It didn't have to be this way. Then, without warning, he raised a hand. Adrian barely had time to react before a wave of invisible force slammed into him. His mind blazed with pressure, like something was trying to dig into his thoughts. Adrian gritted his teeth. No, not today. With every ounce of willpower he had, Adrian shoved back, pushing against the unseen force invading his mind. Kren's eyes widened in shock. "You resist." Adrian smirked through the pain. "Yeah, we tend to do that." Kren's expression hardened. "Enough." The guards raised their weapons. Velis moved. With a fluid motion, she grabbed Adrian's hand and activated the shuttle's emergency thrusters. The force ripped them both backward, launching them into the shuttle as the doors slammed shut. "Buckle in," Velis shouted. Adrian barely had time to strap himself down before the shuttle blasted out of the docking bay, spiraling into the void. Behind them, the Federation flagship loomed, its weapons powering up. Velis's hands flew over the controls. "Hang on." The shuttle lurched as she jumped the ship into warp space, the stars streaking into a blinding blur. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian exhaled, running a hand over his face. "Well," he muttered, "that could have gone worse." Velis turned to him, her breath still unsteady. Adrian met her gaze. For the first time, there were no masks, no diplomacy. Just two people who had barely survived. "We just declared war on the Federation," Velis murmured. Adrian nodded. "Yeah," he said, "and I'm betting we're just getting started. A future worth fighting for." The stolen shuttle lurched violently, warning alarms blaring as it rocketed through the void. Adrian gripped the console edge, trying not to get ripped from his seat as Velis fought to stabilize their course. The Federation would be tracking them. Hell, they were probably already in pursuit. But Adrian wasn't thinking about that right now. Right now, all he could think about was Velis. She sat across from him, her body still tensed with adrenaline, her golden eyes scanning the ship's displays with cold focus. The iridescent shimmer beneath her skin flickered erratically, something he now recognized as a sign of distress. She was holding it together. Barely. Adrian exhaled. "Talk to me, Vel." She didn't look at him. "There's nothing to say." Adrian scoffed. "Bullshit." That got her attention. She turned, narrowing her eyes. "We just stole a Federation shuttle, declared war on my father, and made enemies of the most powerful government in the galaxy. What exactly would you like me to say?" Adrian smirked despite himself. I don't know. Maybe something dramatic. We're in this together, Adrian. Let's fight for the future of our species. He shrugged. Something like that. Velis just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his utter shock, she laughed. Not the polite, restrained chuckle he had heard before, but a real, unfiltered laugh. Adrian's chest tightened. Damn. She was beautiful when she let herself be. Velis shook her head, still smiling faintly. You are insufferable. Adrian grinned. You're not the first to say that. She sobered quickly, her expression turning serious. But you are right about one thing. Adrian raised a brow. Just one. Velis ignored him. We are in this together now. She exhaled slowly. And we need a plan. Adrian leaned forward. I'm all ears. Velis pulled up a holographic map, highlighting a remote system on the outer rim of Federation space. There's a colony here, she explained. A hidden sanctuary for defectors, rogues, and those who refuse to bow to the Federation's rule. Adrian studied the map. And you know this how? Velis hesitated. Because my mother is there. That stopped him cold. Velis's mother. He had never heard her mention family aside from her father. Velis saw his surprise and gave a faint, sad smile. She was different. She believed the Federation was wrong to force compliance. She fought against them. My father considered her a traitor. Adrian swallowed. What happened to her? Velis's jaw tightened. She disappeared when I was a child. Everyone assumed she was dead. But I found records, hidden transmissions. She's alive. And she's waiting. Adrian's mind was already spinning with possibilities. If Velis's mother had been fighting against the Federation for years, then she might have resources, allies, a resistance. This wasn't just about running anymore. This was about fighting back. Adrian nodded. All right, let's go find your mother. Velis looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Adrian stilled. Her touch was warm, electric, but not because of her alien biology. Because it felt right. This is just the beginning, Adrian, she whispered. He squeezed her hand. I know. Then, together, they set course for the only future worth fighting for. Epilogue. The rebellion begins. 3 weeks later, Adrian and Velis stood on the surface of Sanctuary 12, watching as the first human-alien resistance force gathered before them. Word had spread fast. The Federation's secret experiments had been exposed, sending shockwaves through the galactic community. Many species, once blind to their government's actions, were beginning to question their loyalty. And Adrian. Adrian had gone from being a pawn in a political game to a symbol of defiance, a human who refused to be controlled. Velis stepped beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd. They're waiting for a leader. Adrian exhaled. Then let's give them one. He stepped forward, facing the gathered soldiers, pilots, and diplomats. And then he spoke. The Federation thought they could break us. They thought they could erase us. They were wrong. Velis smiled. And in that moment, Adrian knew. This was just the beginning.